Today I will tell you about the day my own family left me behind at the airport gate, thinking I was powerless, and how I turned my back, walked toward my waiting jet, and by the time they landed, the papers that ended their security were already signed. Silence followed. When they dismissed me at Gate 47, luggage in hand and no goodbye, I discovered who they truly were and who I had always been. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below to join me in more grandma life stories that reveal dignity, betrayal, and the quiet strength to rise again. My name is Susan Miller. I am 73 years old, a widow who once helped build a logistics company in Chicago. I live modestly now in Denver, in a townhouse with a small garden where I grow lavender and tomatoes. People see me walking my dog, waving kindly to neighbors, and they think I am just another elderly woman living quietly on a pension. What no one realizes, not even my own daughter, is that I have spent decades protecting, planning, and building a life far larger than what meets the eye. That morning, I rose before dawn. I laid out the navy blouse my daughter Melissa once said made me look elegant. I polished my low-heeled shoes, placed my passport in the side pocket of my suitcase, and double-checked the boarding pass I had printed weeks earlier. As I closed the door of my townhouse, I whispered to myself, "It will be a beautiful trip." The taxi ride to Denver International Airport was quiet, the city lights still glowing faintly as the sun began to rise. I thought about Melissa, about Andrew, and about the grandchildren I hoped to spend time with. I pictured myself sitting with Emily, teaching her how to knit, or listening to Daniel tell me about his favorite science project. My heart felt full. Inside the terminal, the familiar sounds wrapped around me, the echo of rolling luggage, the voice of the announcer calling flights, the laughter of families already in vacation mode. I clutched the handle of my suitcase and walked toward Gate 47, each step light with expectation. I arrived early, as I always do. I found a seat where I could watch the electronic board that displayed our flight to Costa Rica. Around me, people greeted each other with hugs, some snapping photos before boarding. I smiled quietly, thinking how Melissa might appreciate a family picture before we boarded together. When I finally spotted them approaching from across the terminal, my heart lifted. Melissa walked briskly, dressed in her tailored blazer. Andrew followed close behind, scrolling on his phone. Caroline, her cousin, strode with that confident, dismissive air she always carried. For a fleeting moment, I felt like part of something whole, part of the family that I believed would carry me with them. But as they drew closer, something about their expressions unsettled me. Melissa's face was tight, controlled, as though she were bracing herself. Andrew kept his eyes lowered, never quite meeting mine, and Caroline's faint smirk made my chest tighten. I stood, smiling, suitcase upright beside me, ready to greet them with warmth. That was the moment, just before words were spoken, when I realized hope can falter in the smallest of silences. The terminal bustled around us, yet I felt the stillness of a storm about to break. I watched them walk away, their polished luggage wheels cutting sharp lines against the floor. Melissa never looked back. Andrew tapped his phone like the moment did not matter. Caroline smirked as if victory had already been claimed. I stood still in the middle of Gate 47, surrounded by strangers rushing to board flights of their own, yet utterly alone in that instant. My suitcase rested beside me, my boarding pass still folded in my hand. For a heartbeat, my chest tightened as though humiliation might crush me. But then, just as quickly, the pain hardened into something else. I had been underestimated too many times before. They believed I would crumple in silence, perhaps return home to cry over what they had done. They were wrong. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number that only a few people in the world would ever need to know. My voice was steady, clipped, deliberate. NetJets, this is Susan Miller. Prepare a flight to Chicago within the hour. There was no tremor in my tone, no trace of defeat, only precision. The attendant on the line answered with immediate recognition. Of course, Ms. Miller. We will have the Gulfstream ready on the private concourse. Your driver will meet you at the south entrance. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my bag. My breathing slowed, my shoulders squared. I was no longer part of the crowd left behind at Gate 47. I was charting a different path, one they would never see coming. Around me, the final boarding call echoed for the flight to Costa Rica. I could hear Melissa's voice faintly, pitched just high enough to sound cheerful for the gate attendant as she handed over her ticket. That false smile, that brittle facade of perfection, had always been her armor. Andrew adjusted his tie. Caroline checked her reflection in the polished glass. They believed the absence of an old woman improved their picture. They did not realize they had just torn the last thread holding their comfort together. I turned away before their plane door closed. My suitcase rolled smoothly behind me, the sound of its wheels crisp against the tile. I did not head toward the exit like any ordinary passenger sent home in disgrace. I strode in the opposite direction, toward the discreet corridor leading to private aviation. Security nodded as I approached, recognizing me without question. I presented no boarding pass. Instead, I handed over a small black card embossed with the emblem of NetJets. The officer glanced at it and stepped aside immediately, pulling the rope for me to pass. In that instant, I crossed an invisible boundary between the world my family believed I inhabited and the world I truly controlled. Inside the private terminal, silence and polished marble replaced the chaos of the public concourse. A concierge greeted me by name, his posture respectful. "Ms. Miller, your aircraft is being fueled. Would you like coffee while you wait?" "Yes, black, no sugar." I sat in a leather chair, opened my planner, and scanned the notes Richard Grant had prepared for me. Richard, my attorney in Chicago, had been urging me for months to finalize the adjustments. I had delayed, still holding on to the naive hope that my daughter would one day see me for who I was, not as an obstacle to her image. Gate 47 had answered that question for me. Through the tall windows, I saw my jet waiting, sleek and white, the tail gleaming in the morning sun. Its engines were silent now, but soon they would roar me into the sky, not as a discarded mother left behind at a gate, but as a woman reclaiming control. The concierge returned with my coffee. I held the warm cup, inhaled deeply, and allowed myself a single thought of what Melissa might be saying in the cabin of her commercial flight. She likely felt relief, convinced she had protected her family's facade. She did not know that by the time her plane touched down, the foundation of her comfort would already be gone. When the announcement came that my aircraft was ready, I rose without hesitation. 2 attendants collected my suitcase and carried it ahead. As I walked down the private corridor toward the waiting jet, I could almost hear the echo of Caroline's dismissive words. A perfect family doesn't need unnecessary details. I smiled faintly. They thought I was unnecessary. Soon, they would understand how essential I had always been. The stairway lowered, and I placed my hand on the polished railing. Inside, the cabin smelled of fresh leather and cedar polish. I slid into the cream seat, buckled in, and set my planner on the table before me. The pilot's voice came over the speaker. "Good morning, Ms. Miller. We are cleared for departure to Chicago. Estimated flight time, 2 hours. Take off as soon as you are ready," I replied. The engines roared, the vibration humming through the seat and into my bones. As the plane began to move, I glanced once more through the small oval window. Somewhere across the field, Melissa's aircraft was taxiing too. 2 planes, 2 directions. She believed she had won, that leaving me behind was the end of my relevance. She could not have known that I was already ahead of her. The jet surged forward, lifting from the ground, slicing through the Colorado sky. I leaned back, calm, composed, a steel resolve anchoring me. The city shrank below. With each mile eastward, I left behind not just Denver, not just Gate 47, but also the illusion that my daughter's approval defined me. By the time I landed in Chicago, Richard would be waiting with the documents I needed. Every signature I placed would alter the trajectory of the very people who had dismissed me. Melissa, Andrew, and Caroline had no idea that the security they flaunted was mine to give or to take away. I lifted my cup of black coffee, steady hands, clear eyes. They thought I had been left behind. They thought I was powerless, but in truth, the moment they turned their backs at Gate 47, I began the chapter where everything they counted on would unravel. I watched them walk away, their polished luggage wheels cutting sharp lines against the floor. Melissa never looked back. Andrew tapped his phone like the moment did not matter. Caroline smirked as if victory had already been claimed. I stood still in the middle of Gate 47, surrounded by strangers rushing to board flights of their own, yet utterly alone in that instant. My suitcase rested beside me, my boarding pass still folded in my hand. For a heartbeat, my chest tightened as though humiliation might crush me. But then, just as quickly, the pain hardened into something else. I had been underestimated too many times before. They believed I would crumple in silence, perhaps return home to cry over what they had done. They were wrong. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number that only a few people in the world would ever need to know. My voice was steady, clipped, deliberate. NetJets? This is Susan Miller. Prepare a flight to Chicago within the hour. And there was no tremor in my tone, no trace of defeat, only precision. The attendant on the line answered with immediate recognition. Of course, Ms. Miller. We will have the Gulfstream ready on the private concourse. Your driver will meet you at the south entrance. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my bag. My breathing slowed, my shoulders squared. I was no longer part of the crowd left behind at Gate 47. I was charting a different path, one they would never see coming. Around me, the final boarding call echoed for the flight to Costa Rica. I could hear Melissa's voice faintly, pitched just high enough to sound cheerful for the gate attendant as she handed over her ticket. That false smile, that brittle facade of perfection, had always been her armor. Andrew adjusted his tie. Caroline checked her reflection in the polished glass. They believed the absence of an old woman improved their picture. They did not realize they had just torn the last thread holding their comfort together. I turned away before their plane door closed. My suitcase rolled smoothly behind me, the sound of its wheels crisp against the tile. I did not head toward the exit like any ordinary passenger sent home in disgrace. I strode in the opposite direction, toward the discreet corridor leading to private aviation. Security nodded as I approached, recognizing me without question. I presented no boarding pass. Instead, I handed over a small black card embossed with the emblem of NetJets. The officer glanced at it and stepped aside immediately, pulling the rope for me to pass. In that instant, I crossed an invisible boundary between the world my family believed I inhabited and the world I truly controlled. Inside the private terminal, silence and polished marble replaced the chaos of the public concourse. A concierge greeted me by name, his posture respectful. Ms. Miller, your aircraft is being fueled. Would you like coffee while you wait? Yes, black, no sugar. I sat in a leather chair, opened my planner, and scanned the notes Richard Grant had prepared for me. Richard, my attorney in Chicago, had been urging me for months to finalize the adjustments. I had delayed, still holding on to the naive hope that my daughter would one day see me for who I was, not as an obstacle to her image. Gate 47 had answered that question for me. Through the tall windows, I saw my jet waiting, sleek and white, the tail gleaming in the morning sun. Its engines were silent now, but soon they would roar me into the sky. Not as a discarded mother left behind at a gate, but as a woman reclaiming control. The concierge returned with my coffee. I held the warm cup, inhaled deeply, and allowed myself a single thought of what Melissa might be saying in the cabin of her commercial flight. She likely felt relief, convinced she had protected her family's facade. She did not know that by the time her plane touched down, the foundation of her comfort would already be gone. When the announcement came that my aircraft was ready, I rose without hesitation. 2 attendants collected my suitcase and carried it ahead. As I walked down the private corridor toward the waiting jet, I could almost hear the echo of Caroline's dismissive words. A perfect family doesn't need unnecessary details. I smiled faintly. They thought I was unnecessary. Soon they would understand how essential I had always been. The stairway lowered, and I placed my hand on the polished railing. Inside, the cabin smelled of fresh leather and cedar polish. I slid into the cream seat, buckled in, and set my planner on the table before me. The pilot's voice came over the speaker. "Good morning, Ms. Miller. We are cleared for departure to Chicago. Estimated flight time, 2 hours. Take off as soon as you are ready," I replied. The engines roared, the vibration humming through the seat and into my bones. As the plane began to move, I glanced once more through the small oval window. Somewhere across the field, Melissa's aircraft was taxiing too. 2 planes, 2 directions. She believed she had won, that leaving me behind was the end of my relevance. She could not have known that I was already ahead of her. The jet surged forward, lifting from the ground, slicing through the Colorado sky. I leaned back, calm, composed, a steel resolve anchoring me. The city shrank below. With each mile eastward, I left behind not just Denver, not just Gate 47, but also the illusion that my daughter's approval defined me. By the time I landed in Chicago, Richard would be waiting with the documents I needed. Every signature I placed would alter the trajectory of the very people who had dismissed me. Melissa, Andrew, and Caroline had no idea that the security they flaunted was mine to give or to take away. I lifted my cup of black coffee, steady hands, clear eyes. They thought I had been left behind. The engines wound down, the door opened, and the attendant gestured for me to step into the waiting car. A black sedan pulled up directly to the steps. No baggage claim, no crowded terminal, only speed and precision. I rode silently through the streets of Chicago, past familiar corners I once crossed decades ago with my husband. The city looked the same, but I was different. I was not here for nostalgia. I was here for action. Within 30 minutes, the car stopped in front of a tall glass tower on Wacker Drive, the building that housed Richard Grant's offices. I entered the lobby, greeted by polished floors, cold marble, and the efficient hush of power at work. The receptionist rose immediately. "Good morning, Ms. Miller. Mr. Grant is expecting you." The elevator climbed swiftly to the 22nd floor. As the doors opened, Richard himself was already waiting at the reception desk. He extended his hand firmly. His hair had gone grayer since the last time I saw him, but his eyes were sharp, attentive. "Susan," he said, ushering me into his office, "you look resolute, but I must ask, do you truly want to go through with this today?" I sat across the mahogany desk, my posture straight, my eyes unwavering. "Richard, what happened at Gate 47 this morning was not an isolated insult. It was the final straw. I will not allow them to thrive on my silence any longer. The papers you prepared, it is time we use them." He nodded slowly, then opened a drawer, pulling out a thick leather-bound folder. The weight of it landed on the desk with authority. He pushed it toward me, then leaned back, studying my face. "You have planned for months. You asked me to draft every contingency. You said you wanted proof of their dependents compiled, every payment recorded. It is all here. Are you ready for them to see the truth in black and white?" I reached for the folder, my hand steady. "I have never been more ready." He flipped the cover open, revealing document after document, bank transfers, mortgage payments, tuition fees, travel expenses. Every line bore my name as the source. I scanned the figures without flinching. My generosity had never been acknowledged, but it was undeniable on these pages. "I told you this day might come," Richard said, "the day you would need to sever the cord. You delayed it because of hope. You wanted Melissa to realize on her own that she was standing on ground you built, but she has not realized, and worse, she has discarded you." "Yes," I said firmly, "and now she will learn that the ground can be taken back." He placed another document in front of me. "This is the amendment to your estate plan. It transfers the majority of your assets into the Susan Miller Foundation, leaving only modest provisions to Melissa's household. Once you sign this, there is no turning back." I picked up the pen, the weight of it balanced in my fingers. For a moment I recalled Melissa as a child, holding my hand tightly when we crossed busy streets. The tenderness flickered and passed. The image of her dismissing me at Gate 47 replaced it entirely. I pressed the pen to the page. "I built a life of strength," I said quietly, more to myself than to Richard. "I will not let them reduce it to weakness." The ink flowed, my signature cut across the page, bold and final. Richard exhaled softly. That is it. The foundation is real now. The disbursements to her household will end within the month. The law is ironclad. They cannot undo this without you. I leaned back, my chest rising with a deep breath that felt like liberation. Good. I want them to understand that the security they believed was theirs by right was, in truth, a privilege I extended, and privileges can be revoked. Richard closed the folder and locked it again. There is also the matter of communication. They will be notified formally by courier tomorrow. Do you want to send a personal letter as well? I shook my head. No letters, no explanations. Let the documents speak for themselves. They dismissed me without a word. I will answer them in the same language. He studied me a moment longer, then said, You are stronger than most CEOs I advise, Susan. I hope they understand the mistake they made. They will, I replied. When their bank accounts shift and their comfort evaporates, they will understand. I stood, moving to the window that looked over the Chicago River. The water below reflected the steel of the city, currents flowing strong and unyielding. I felt the same within myself. The woman who had been left at gate was gone. The one standing here was immovable. Richard came to stand beside me. Shall I schedule the press briefing for the foundation launch? It could be announced in a few weeks. Yes, I said firmly. Let the world see my resources are for building futures, not feeding entitlement. That will be the true legacy. I turned back from the glass, gathered my bag, and prepared to leave. Richard shook my hand firmly once more. Chicago is yours again, Susan. As I walked back through the office, staff glanced up with quiet respect. They saw not a fragile widow, but a woman in command of her destiny. I rode the elevator down, stepped into the waiting car, and gave only one instruction. Take me to the Millennium Tower. It is time I looked at my new home. The car moved into the Chicago streets, horns blaring in the distance, but none of it touched me. My path was clear, my resolve sharper than it had ever been. I had crossed the threshold this morning when they turned their backs. Now, with every mile in this city, I was stepping further into the life I had always been capable of claiming. They thought they had left me behind. But here in Chicago, with Richard's folder locked and my signature inked, I had already moved far ahead. Richard unlocked the heavy folder and laid its contents across the polished surface of his desk. Page after page spread before me, each sheet carrying numbers that spoke louder than any words Melissa or Andrew had ever said. He adjusted his glasses and tapped the first page. Susan, these are the records you asked me to compile. Every transfer, every payment, every receipt. You should see it all laid out. More than $400,000 over 15 years. The weight of the figure did not shock me. I had lived it, dollar by dollar, choice by choice. What struck me was the way it looked in ink, undeniable, stripped of memory or sentiment. Cold numbers replacing warm sacrifices. I picked up the first sheet. Mortgage payments. The house Melissa bragged about to her neighbors, the one she claimed she and Andrew had worked so hard to secure, had my name hidden in every line of the bank statements. I read the totals month after month for over a decade. I placed it down and moved to the next stack. Tuition payments. Every semester for Emily and Daniel written in my hand, drawn from my accounts. The schools had my number on file, not theirs. I remembered the nights I had reassured Melissa that she would not need to worry about tuition deadlines. She had smiled, thanked me briefly, then presented it to others as her own accomplishment. Then came the pages of travel expenses. Trips to Disney World, ski vacations in Aspen, flights to Europe. Receipts showed my card, my transactions. The same vacations where I had been told I was too frail to join, too inconvenient to bring along. They had traveled on my dime while leaving me behind in silence. I exhaled slowly, not with sorrow, but with clarity. I bought their house. I paid for their children's education. I covered their vacations. Yet at gate 47, I was treated as if I were nothing but excess baggage. They have not only abandoned me emotionally, they have lived off me entirely. Richard's expression was grim. They may not even realize the full extent, Susan. They've been comfortable for so long, they may truly believe they built it themselves. That is the danger of dependency. It blinds them to reality. I studied the totals again, tracing the lines with my finger. Over $400,000. That number was not just money. It was time, patience, restraint. It was every hour I had spent working after my husband passed, every dividend reinvested, every sacrifice disguised as generosity. "They dismissed me this morning without a thought," I said, my voice sharper now. "But these pages prove that their stability has been nothing but borrowed from me." Richard slid another document forward. "This schedule shows what happens when the support ends. Without your payments, they will be forced to cover mortgage, tuition, and lifestyle expenses on their own. Their current income cannot sustain it. Within months, they will feel the ground shift beneath them." I felt no hesitation. Good. They need to feel it. They need to understand that security is earned, not handed out like candy to children who never grow up. I signed the acknowledgement page, authorizing Richard to proceed. My name cut across the line in bold ink, just as it had cut across every check I had written for them. But this time, the signature was not giving, it was taking back. I leaned back in my chair and looked directly at Richard. When Melissa receives the courier package, she will realize two truths at once. First, that I know every lie she has told about independence. Second, that the privilege she counted on has ended. This is not revenge. This is correction. Richard nodded, sliding the folder back into its case. It is a decisive correction. They will have to restructure everything, and they will know exactly who held the power all along. I rose from my chair and walked to the window. Chicago stretched out beneath me, the river glinting like steel in the afternoon light. I thought of Melissa's confident stride through the airport, Andrew's smug silence, Caroline's cruel smirk. They had believed I was an afterthought. The evidence lying on Richard's desk proved the opposite. $400,000, I said quietly, almost to myself. 15 years of life, and still they threw me away. Let them now discover what it feels like to be without me. Richard came to stand beside me. "Susan, once the notifications are sent, there is no going back." "There is no need to go back," I answered. "The past 15 years already told me what I needed to know. This is not the end of something. It is the beginning of my clarity." I turned from the window, my steps steady as I collected my bag. The pages of numbers remained behind in the locked folder, but their meaning traveled with me. Those figures were no longer chains tying me to ungrateful children. They were proof of what I had built, what I had given, and what I was reclaiming. By the time Melissa stepped off her flight, I thought, she would still be basking in the illusion of control. She would not yet know that her foundation had already crumbled, not through anger, not through chance, but through the deliberate stroke of my pen. They dismissed me as a burden. These documents declared me the source, and now the source was closed. The following morning, I stood before the tall glass facade of Millennium Tower, the building gleaming in the sharp Chicago sunlight. Its steel frame seemed to rise straight into the clouds, a monument to permanence and power. I had walked away from numbers the night before, cold lines proving years of sacrifice, and now I was ready to claim something entirely mine. The driver opened the door, and I stepped out with steady feet. Inside the lobby, the marble floors reflected the golden light pouring through the high windows. The air smelled of cedar and polish, not of transience, but of belonging. A sales executive greeted me with eager courtesy. "Mrs. Miller, welcome. The documents are prepared. We are honored you chose Millennium Tower." I inclined my head but did not smile. "Take me to the unit first. I want to see the view before I sign." We entered the private elevator, ascending swiftly past the lower floors, past the hum of ordinary lives. When the doors opened, I stepped into the penthouse, an expanse of glass, steel, and light. The Chicago skyline unfolded in every direction, the river curving below like a silver ribbon, the lake stretching vast and blue beyond. I walked slowly across the room, the soles of my shoes clicking against the polished wood. I placed my hand against the glass and looked out. Here was no small garden tucked in a Denver suburb. Here was height, clarity, vision. The executive followed me nervously. It is 12,000 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 6 baths, private elevator access. The terrace alone is 600 square feet. Every detail is premium. I turned, my expression firm. Bring the contract. At the long dining table, the papers were laid out. The pen gleamed against the page, waiting. I lowered myself into the chair, read the details carefully, then pressed my signature across each page with deliberate precision. When I finished, I set the pen down, my hand unwavering. "This place is not just a residence," I said, my voice echoing softly through the vast room. "It is a statement. I will no longer live in shadows." The executive, relieved, gathered the papers. "Congratulations, Mrs. Miller. You are now the owner of the Millennium Tower penthouse." I did not linger. I had another appointment across the city. An hour later, I entered Richard Grant's office once more. This time he had a different folder waiting, thinner, but carrying more weight than real estate contracts ever could. He rose as I approached, laying it flat before me. "This," he said, "is the charter for the Susan Miller Foundation. It establishes your intent, transfers assets, and defines its mission: to support women who want to create businesses of their own, independent, sustainable, and free from the patterns of dependency you have witnessed firsthand." I placed both hands on the folder, feeling its weight. "Richard, I do not want my legacy to end with cutting ties. That would be too small. I want it to begin here. Every dollar they squandered will be multiplied in the hands of women who will build, not consume." He nodded. "Then sign it, and it becomes real." I opened the folder. The words on the page reflected everything I had carried silently for years. I remembered the long hours after my husband's passing, building investments while raising Melissa, working late with little rest. I remembered being told to be quiet, to step aside, to accept invisibility. Now, in black ink, was my answer. I lifted the pen, my voice steady as I spoke aloud. "This is my rebirth." The signature carved across the page, bold and unbroken. Richard closed the folder gently. "It is done. The foundation exists. Its funds are secure. Its mission will outlive all of us." I leaned back in the chair, letting the moment settle over me. It was not triumph in the shallow sense. It was transformation. Yesterday I had been a widow, dismissed at an airport gate. Today I was the owner of a penthouse in Millennium Tower and the founder of an institution that would change lives. I stood, crossing to the window. Chicago pulsed below, restless, alive. For years I had given quietly, hidden in the background, enabling comfort for people who only mocked the hand that sustained them. Now I would give differently, not to shield arrogance, but to fuel resilience. Richard joined me at the glass. "They will not believe this when they discover it. They will think you moved in anger." I shook my head. "Anger passes. This is clarity. I cut them off because they dismissed me. But I created the foundation because I refuse to be defined by what I lost. I will be defined by what I build." I left his office with new papers in my bag, but more than that, with a new sense of identity. The penthouse was walls and glass. The foundation was vision and purpose. Together, they marked the truth. I had not only severed the ties of dependency, I had stepped fully into the life I was always meant to lead. By the time Melissa set her bags down in Costa Rica, smiling for photographs and convincing herself the picture was perfect, she had no idea of the storm forming in Chicago. She thought she had left me behind. She could not see that I had already risen far above her reach. The waves crashed hard against the white sand beaches of Costa Rica as my family settled into the illusion of their perfect escape. Melissa stretched out on a lounge chair beneath a striped umbrella, tilting her phone until the sunlight hit her face just right. I knew her habits well. Within moments, she would post a carefully crafted photo online, presenting the image of a flawless family vacation. Her voice carried lightly over the ocean breeze. "Andrew, stand closer. Emily, Daniel, smile bigger. This one is going to be perfect. #family goals." She snapped the picture, checked it twice, and posted it with practiced precision. Within minutes, the notifications lit up her screen. Friends and acquaintances sent heart emojis, comments of envy and admiration. Melissa's expression relaxed into satisfaction. To the world, she looked like a woman who had everything. Andrew leaned back, adjusting his sunglasses with a smug grin. Finally, we got rid of the extra weight. No mother-in-law dragging us down, no awkwardness, just us. This is how it should be. Melissa laughed lightly, almost rehearsed. It feels cleaner, doesn't it? No one to make us look less polished. Caroline, sitting with a cocktail in hand, nodded approvingly. Her tone dripped with certainty. At last, the picture is complete. No unnecessary details. People will see you as the strong, perfect family you want them to see. They clinked their glasses together, smiling as if they had triumphed. The children played nearby in the surf, innocent to the words exchanged. Emily built a sandcastle. Daniel collected seashells, their laughter real in contrast to the adults' staged performance. Yet the adults barely noticed. They were too busy congratulating themselves. I pictured them there as Richard laid documents in front of me back in Chicago. I could almost hear Andrew's gloating voice in my head. They thought they had escaped me, but in truth they had escaped nothing. Their comfort was already evaporating, though they were too blind to see it. Melissa scrolled through comments on her post, a faint sneer on her lips. Look at this. Everyone's jealous. This is exactly the image I want. Perfect, untouchable. No one needs to know what really happens behind closed doors. Andrew reached for his drink and chuckled. They don't need to know that the house payments aren't really ours, or that the kids' tuition hasn't come from our pockets. As long as they believe, that's enough. And without your mother's presence, no one questions it. Caroline leaned forward, her eyes sharp. You've done the right thing. Cutting her out protects your image. People would only see weakness otherwise. Believe me, appearances are everything. Melissa's smile hardened. She never understood that. She lived too simply, too plainly. She thought generosity was enough. It never is. I could see her face in my mind as she said it, the same daughter I once cradled, now blinded by her obsession with being admired. The waiter approached with another round of drinks. Andrew raised his glass, his voice confident. To us, free at last. Caroline mirrored him, eyes gleaming. To the family everyone envies. Melissa lifted hers with satisfaction. To never being dragged down again. They laughed, the sound brittle against the sound of the waves. Yet beneath their laughter, reality waited. The mortgage payments I had sustained would end. The tuition fees I had covered were already reassigned. The vacations I had quietly financed had reached their last sunset. The security they toasted was already gone, dissolved the moment I signed my name in Richard's office. I imagined Melissa checking her phone again, delighted by the approval of strangers. She had no idea that when she returned, an envelope would be waiting. No hashtags, no filters, no applause would protect her from what was coming. Their conversation drifted back to money, always circling around image. Andrew bragged about the next project at work, promising he would land a promotion soon. Caroline offered advice on how to spin it, how to make their life look even more enviable online. Melissa smiled, pretending to believe, even though deep down she knew Andrew's promises rarely became reality. I knew better. I had seen the numbers. Without me, their income could not sustain the life they flaunted. And soon, when the truth arrived in cold legal terms, they would no longer laugh over cocktails. The sky darkened over the beach as the sun began to set. Melissa insisted on another round of photos, capturing the golden glow. She held Andrew's hand, pulled the children close, and smiled wide for the camera. Another post went live. The perfect evening with the perfect family. The likes would pile up, the admiration would flow. But I knew what waited for her in Chicago. Not approval, not admiration, only silence. Silence heavier than the applause she craved. I thought of her words at Gate 47, dismissing me with practiced cruelty. And then I thought of her now, sitting smugly beneath a tropical sky, certain she had erased me. They celebrated in ignorance. They toasted an illusion. And I, hundreds of miles away, had already stripped away the ground beneath them. Their security was gone. They just did not know it yet. The flight from Costa Rica touched down in Denver on a bright afternoon, the family walking off the plane with sunburned faces and luggage heavy with souvenirs. Melissa smiled faintly as she scrolled through her phone, still counting the likes and comments from the curated photos she had posted during the trip. Andrew yawned, already talking about unpacking quickly so he could rest. Caroline kept her sunglasses on even inside the terminal, radiating that air of smug satisfaction. To them, the vacation had been proof that their family image was intact, untouchable. But waiting for them at their home on Maple Grove Lane was a package. A plain white envelope, delivered by courier, sealed tightly and marked with the letterhead of Richard Grant's law firm. It sat squarely on the entry table, impossible to ignore. Melissa picked it up as they stepped inside, her voice uneasy. "This came while we were gone, from Richard Grant." Andrew frowned. "Your mother's attorney? Why would he send us anything?" Caroline crossed her arms, suspicion narrowing her eyes. "Open it. Let's see." Melissa tore the seal carefully, but as she unfolded the first page, her hands began to shake. The words stared back at her in bold type. Notice of termination of all financial support, effective within 30 days. Her lips parted, her face drained of color. She whispered, almost choking, "It says she's cutting everything. Mortgage payments, tuition, allowances, all of it. It's all ending." Caroline's voice sliced through the room like a blade. "You weak fool. You let her do this to you. You let a 73-year-old woman hold the strings and now she's cut them. You thought you were perfect, but you've been exposed." Andrew slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the envelope and shaking the glasses nearby. "This is humiliation. She humiliated us. Do you realize what people will say when they find out we can't even afford our own house? That we've been living off her money all along?" Melissa stammered, desperate to breathe. "No one has to know. We can figure something out. We can refinance. We can—" Caroline snapped. "Refinance with what credit? With what income? Everything you flaunted is built on her. The perfect pictures you posted, the vacations, the schools for your kids. It was never yours. It was hers. And she just ended it." Melissa pressed her hand to her mouth, tears threatening to fall, but Andrew's fury only grew. He paced across the living room, veins bulging at his temples. "I warned you. I told you she always looked down on me. She wanted me to fail. Now she's made it public. She stripped us bare. What kind of man am I, if my family finds out I couldn't even support them without her?" Caroline smirked cruelly. The kind of man who depended on his mother-in-law's charity, and now the charity is over. Melissa spun toward her cousin, her voice breaking. "Stop it! This isn't helping!" But Caroline only leaned in, her tone venomous. "You never listened. You thought keeping her close was harmless. You should have cut her off completely. You should have shown the world you didn't need her. Instead, you played both sides, and now she's destroyed the illusion." Melissa's tears spilled, falling onto the paper still clutched in her hand. The legal language blurred, but the meaning was unmistakable. 30 days. That was all. I could picture them standing in that living room, their arrogance unraveling in real time. They had toasted in Costa Rica, confident they were free from me. Now they stood surrounded by walls they could no longer claim as their own, facing bills they could not pay. Andrew's voice rose again, filled with rage. "This is more than money. This is reputation. People will know. They'll whisper. They'll laugh at us. The perfect family? Gone. We're nothing without her." Caroline jabbed a finger toward Melissa. "You wanted appearances more than truth. Well, appearances just shattered. You look like a fool. And worse, you look powerless." Melissa collapsed onto the couch, the envelope still clutched tightly. "She planned this. She's been preparing it. She knew exactly how to cut us down." Andrew hissed. "And she enjoyed it. You know she did." Caroline's eyes gleamed with bitterness. "She's always enjoyed being in control. Now she's reminding you who built your life. You thought you had erased her at Gate 47. Instead, she erased you." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the truth pressing down on all three of them. The children upstairs laughed as they unpacked souvenirs, blissfully unaware of the storm downstairs. Melissa finally whispered, her voice hollow, "What are we going to do?" Neither Andrew nor Caroline answered. They knew the truth. Without me, their finances would collapse. Without me, their image of perfection was finished. And they knew the world would see it soon enough. The envelope lay open on the table, its pages stark and undeniable. It was not just the end of support. It was the end of the illusion they had built their lives upon. They thought they had left me behind. Instead, I had left them with nothing. Melissa's knock thundered against the door of my new residence in Millennium Tower. I had been expecting it. Rage does not travel slowly, and hers had been simmering since the courier's envelope landed in her hands. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word, allowing her to enter. She froze the moment she crossed the threshold. The vast penthouse spread out before her. Gleaming hardwood floors, towering glass windows framing the Chicago skyline, and the quiet hum of luxury. It was the complete opposite of the modest townhouse in Denver she had always associated with me. Her eyes darted around, disbelief colliding with fury. This is where you live now?" she spat. "All this time, you let us think you were simple, limited, almost poor, and here you are, sitting on this palace while you've been paying our bills in silence." I walked calmly to the dining table, where a folder of documents lay open from my morning's work. I placed my hand on the leather cover. "You never asked who I really was. You never cared. You were too busy convincing the world you didn't need me, yet every piece of your life has rested on my support." Melissa's voice rose to a scream. "You're destroying us. Do you understand? You're tearing everything apart. The house, the schools, the image we built, gone, all because of you." I turned slowly, my tone unshaken. "No, I am not destroying you. I am giving you back the truth. You have lived in a lie, propped up by my sacrifices, and you called it independence. I am simply handing your life back to you, without the illusions." Her face twisted, tears of rage threatening to fall. "Why now? Why like this? If you wanted respect, you could have asked for it." I let the silence hang before answering. Respect is not something that must be requested. It is owed, and you owed it long ago. She slammed her fist onto the polished marble counter. "You've humiliated us publicly. Do you know what Andrew says? Do you know what people will think when they find out we can't maintain our home or our children's schools? You've made us look like beggars." I stepped closer, meeting her eyes with a steadiness that cut through her anger. "You made yourselves look like beggars when you chose appearances over substance. I only stopped feeding the illusion." Her breath quickened. She looked around the penthouse again, as though the walls themselves accused her. "You! How long have you been hiding this side of yourself? All this time you let us believe you were nothing more than an aging widow. But this—" She gestured toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, the art on the walls, the commanding view of the city. "This is power." I nodded once. "Yes, this is who I am. Not the weak mother you abandoned at Gate 47. I am the woman who built, invested, planned, and executed. The woman who held your life together while you pretended it was all your doing. I am no longer hidden." "Oh," Melissa's voice cracked. "You've become someone else." "No," I corrected sharply. "I have become visible. I was always this. You chose not to see it. You preferred the version of me that you could dismiss. But the truth was waiting, and now it stands before you." She shook her head violently, pacing the room like a cornered animal. "What do you expect from me? Gratitude? Apology? To kneel here in this penthouse and admit you were right?" I stayed where I was, unmoved. "I expect nothing. What I do now is not for your approval. It is for clarity. I gave you comfort and you mistook it for entitlement. Now I give you reality, and you call it cruelty. That says more about you than it does about me." Her voice dropped into a bitter whisper. "You've cut us off completely. What will happen to us?" I did not flinch. You will live as you should have lived all along, by your own means. You will discover if your ambition matches your arrogance. You will learn if Andrew's promises hold weight when they are no longer subsidized. You will find out if Caroline's advice builds stability or only destroys it. Without my money, you will face yourselves. That is your inheritance." The words landed, and for the first time I saw fear flash in her eyes. She looked down, her hands trembling. "I don't know if we can do it." "You could have, years ago," I replied firmly. "But you chose not to. Now you will have no choice." Melissa turned back toward the windows, her shoulders hunched, the city lights beginning to shimmer in the dusk. For all her screaming and venom, she looked smaller now, stripped of the confidence that had carried her through Costa Rica. She spun once more, her anger flaring for a final burst. "You think this makes you strong? You think this makes you better than us? You've just proven you're ruthless." I met her fury with steel. "No, I have proven I am not weak. There is a difference." Silence filled the room after my words, heavy and undeniable. The skyline glowed outside, casting long shadows across the penthouse floor. She stared at me, perhaps searching for the mother she thought she could manipulate. But that woman no longer existed. Melissa finally stormed toward the door, yanking it open with trembling hands. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "You'll regret this, Mother! You'll regret cutting us off!" I did not move. My reply was even, final. "No, Melissa. The only regret will be yours." The door slammed, leaving only silence behind. I walked back to the dining table, gathered the documents of the foundation, and slid them into my bag. The confrontation had not shaken me. It had confirmed me. I was not the discarded woman of Gate 47. I was the strategist in the penthouse, the one who signed papers that shifted futures. For the first time in years, I felt not just alive, but commanding. They thought I had been an invisible mother clinging to relevance. In truth, I had been a CEO in the shadows, waiting for the moment to step fully into the light. I laid the folder flat on the marble counter, sliding it toward Melissa. The leather creaked as it opened, page after page, spilling out. Lines of figures, dates, account numbers, signatures. Cold proof. My proof. Melissa stared, her eyes flicking over the first sheet. Her face drained of color as she realized what she was reading. I tapped the page sharply with my finger. Mortgage payments. Every month for 15 years. Not from Andrew, not from you, from me. That house you parade in as if it's your crowning achievement. My money holds up those walls. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. I didn't know. My voice cut like glass. Not knowing or not wanting to know. There's a difference, Melissa. I slid the next stack forward. Tuition. Emily and Daniel's schools, every semester. The receipts bear my name, not yours. The schools had my number on speed dial, not yours. I carried their future on my back while you posed for pictures to prove you were the perfect mother. And Melissa's hands trembled. Her voice cracked. I thought Andrew handled some of that. You thought, I snapped, because it was easier than facing reality. You wanted to believe in your fiction of independence. You wanted to show the world a facade of success while I was paying the price for every inch of it. I shoved another pile toward her, the papers rustling like thunder. Vacations, Florida, Aspen, Paris, every flight, every hotel, every meal. Do you remember telling me I was too old, too frail to come along? That I would only slow you down? I paid for every cocktail you sipped by the pool while I sat alone in Denver. Her eyes filled, but I didn't soften. You told people you earned it. You told friends Andrew worked hard for it. Lies. All of it. Melissa pressed both hands to her temples, shaking her head as if trying to erase the truth. Stop. I can't. No, I said coldly. You will not look away. You will see every figure, every sacrifice you buried under your vanity. You lived like royalty because I made sure you never touched the ground. Andrew wasn't there to shield her with excuses. Caroline wasn't there to deflect with venom. It was just Melissa and the weight of undeniable numbers. She flipped through the pages, her breathing uneven. $423,000. I said firmly, my tone precise. That is the sum of what I gave. Do you know what that represents? Years of my life. Hours of work, every dividend reinvested, every choice calculated. And what did I receive in return? Abandonment at an airport gate. Melissa's shoulders collapsed, her voice breaking. I didn't realize it was all you. I didn't realize the scale of it. I leaned closer, my words low, sharp. You didn't realize because you didn't want to. Ignorance was convenient. As long as the bills vanished and the trips appeared, you never asked how. You didn't care. You only cared that your image remained intact. She whispered, tears spilling. I thought you wanted to help. I thought you enjoyed giving. I let the silence hang for a beat, then answered with steel. I gave because I loved, and you mistook love for obligation. You mistook generosity for weakness, and you mistook me for someone who would never stop. Her sobs echoed in the vast penthouse, but I did not reach for her. Sympathy was no longer the currency between us. Truth was. I gathered the pages back into the folder, snapping it shut with finality. Do you understand now why I ended it? Do you understand why your life collapsed the moment my pen lifted off the page in Richard's office? Melissa nodded weakly, unable to speak, her face streaked with tears. I straightened, my voice calm, resolute. You abandoned me at gate 47, but you did worse than that. You built your life on me, and then pretended I didn't exist. Now you face the life you claimed as your own. Live it. Prove you can, or fall under the weight of your own arrogance. That choice is finally yours. Her lips trembled. I can't believe it's come to this. I looked down at her, unflinching. Believe it. Because numbers don't lie. They strip away illusions, and they show who really paid for the life you flaunted. Those numbers are mine, and they are finished. Melissa broke into quiet sobs, clutching the envelope as though it could change. But nothing could. The truth was permanent, carved into every page. For years, I had been invisible in her story, the silent provider, the forgotten backbone. Tonight, I had shown her exactly what she had buried. She had lived on me. Every brick, every bill, every glass of wine in a foreign country me. Andrew stormed into the penthouse the next evening, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. Melissa trailed behind him, still shaken, but it was his anger that filled the air like smoke. Caroline followed close, her eyes sharp, her expression already laced with scorn. I remained seated at the long glass table, the city lights burning behind me through the massive windows. I did not rise. I did not flinch. I waited. Andrew's voice cut first, bitter and harsh. You used money as a leash. Every payment you made wasn't kindness. It was control. You wanted us dependent so you could hold it over us. Don't pretend it was love. I met his fury with steady calm. Control. If I wanted control, I would have paraded my sacrifices, demanded thanks at every turn. Instead, I stayed silent. It was you who chose to twist generosity into entitlement. You call it a leash only now because the cord has been cut. He slammed his hand down on the table. You enjoyed watching us rely on you. You built this empire not out of compassion, but out of ego. Admit it. My voice sharpened. If I sought ego, Andrew, I would have flaunted my penthouse years ago. I would have announced to the world that every bill in your house bore my name. But I said nothing. I let you live in peace. And how did you repay me? By discarding me at an airport gate. Melissa's lips parted as though to defend him, but Caroline stepped forward first, her words laced with venom. You think you're untouchable. Do you know what it's like to live in your shadow? My whole life I was compared to you. You, the perfect Susan, the successful one, the one everyone admired. Do you know what that does to a person? It eats you alive. I turned my gaze on her. So your answer was to tear me down? To humiliate me so the world would see me as weak? That was your revenge? Her smile was cold. Revenge isn't the word. Justice, maybe. Balance. I wanted people to see the truth, that you're not some goddess of sacrifice. You're just an old woman clinging to relevance." Melissa whispered. "Caroline, stop." But Caroline's eyes burned hotter. "No, she needs to hear it. She needs to know why I sided with Melissa at the gate, because I wanted the world to finally see her as I've seen her, flawed, old, finished." I stood then, my chair sliding back with deliberate force. My voice was iron. "You call me finished, yet you stand in my home, surrounded by the walls I built, the glass I purchased, the light I claimed. You think stripping me of dignity at an airport made me small. But look around, Caroline. Look around and see who is diminished." Andrew's tone dropped lower, filled with poison. "You wanted us to dance to your tune, Susan. You wanted us on our knees for your approval. Well, I'd rather burn than bend to you." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. "You already bent, Andrew. Every check I wrote kept you standing. Without them, you collapse. You speak of burning? The fire started the moment you spat on the hand that sustained you." Melissa sobbed quietly, caught between us, her voice cracking. "Stop, please. All of you. This isn't what I wanted." I faced her directly. "It is exactly what you wanted, Melissa. You wanted the illusion of perfection without the work behind it. You wanted to be admired for strength that was never yours. You asked for this moment the second you turned away at gate 47. Caroline scoffed, her bitterness unyielding. "She thinks she's powerful because of numbers and documents, but power fades. Time will strip it away. I'll make sure everyone sees her for what she is." I held her stare until she faltered. "Power is not in documents. Power is in truth. And truth is standing here, unshaken, while you choke on excuses. You want to show the world I am finished? Then you must first survive the collapse of the life you built on lies, and you will not survive it." Andrew's face flushed, his voice trembling with fury. "You can't do this to us." I leaned closer, my voice cold and final. "I already have." The room fell into silence. Melissa sank into a chair, her shoulders shaking. Caroline pressed her lips together, unable to spit another word. Andrew paced like a caged animal, but even he had no answer left. I gathered the folder of documents once more, tapping it against the table. "This is not control. This is exposure. I carried you for years, and you mistook it for weakness. Now you stand on your own, and the ground beneath you is crumbling. You hate me for it, but the truth remains. Without me, you were never standing at all." The three of them stared at me in stunned silence. Their hatred was real, their bitterness raw, and yet beneath it all was the simple fact they could not escape. I was no longer the weak woman they imagined. I had stepped into the light, not as a mother begging for respect, but as the strategist who had planned every move. Instead, I buried their illusions here in my penthouse. Melissa sat frozen in the chair across from me, her eyes still wet from our last exchange. Andrew leaned against the counter, arms crossed tight, his jaw set in defiance. Caroline stood by the window, her lips curled into that same smirk she wore at the airport, but I could see the uncertainty flickering beneath it now. They thought the confrontation had peaked, but I had not yet revealed the depth of what I carried. I opened a drawer in the credenza behind me and pulled out another folder, sleeker, embossed with the seal of a corporation they all knew by name. I set it on the table and slid it forward. Melissa's trembling hands reached for it, curiosity and dread tangled in her expression. She opened the folder, scanned the first page, and her breath caught audibly. This is from Northern Continental Logistics. It's a shareholder's report." Andrew frowned, leaning in. "Why would you have that?" I met his gaze with a cold steadiness. "Because I am one of its largest shareholders. I have been for decades. Every quarter, millions of dollars flow directly into my accounts. Not inheritance, not charity. Dividends from shares I earned and protected long after your father was gone." Melissa's face drained of color, her lips trembling. "Mother, you never told me. You never said a word." I answered firmly, each word deliberate. "Because I wanted you to learn to stand on your own. I wanted you to understand independence, to build your own strength. But instead, you learned how to rely on appearances. You learned how to dismiss me. You learned how to believe that my quiet life meant weakness." She shook her head slowly, her voice breaking. "All this time, you had that kind of wealth, and you still lived so simply." "Yes," I said sharply. "I lived simply because wealth does not need to scream. Power does not need to beg for recognition. I kept silent, hoping you would discover your own resilience. But instead, you took my silence as proof that I had nothing, and you treated me accordingly." Andrew sneered, trying to mask his shock with hostility. "So this is what you're proud of? Sitting on millions while you let us believe you were struggling? That's manipulation." I turned on him, my tone cutting. "No, Andrew, that is discipline. That is foresight. That is what separates builders from pretenders. You thought you were clever, mocking me, pushing me aside, but you were blind. You stood on ground I built, blind to the steel beneath your feet." Caroline scoffed from the window, but her voice faltered as she spoke. "You hid it because you knew people would hate you for it. You didn't want them to know you were still powerful. You wanted to play the martyr." I faced her directly. "No, I hid it because I had nothing to prove. I did not need applause. I did not need envy. I needed only to know that my daughter could carry her own life without leaning on mine. And I see now, I was wrong." Melissa dropped the folder onto the table, her hands trembling. You let me walk around acting superior. You let me think you were small while you were this." Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me, Mother? Why didn't you show me?" I leaned closer, my eyes sharp. "Because if I had told you, you would have clung to it even harder. You would have built your image not only on my sacrifices, but also on my empire. You did not need my fortune. You needed humility, and you rejected it." The room was silent, the weight of truth pressing against every wall. I continued, my tone steel on stone. "I am not the frail woman you discarded at Gate 47. I am the architect of my own life, the shareholder whose name carries weight in boardrooms you will never enter. I am not just wealthy, Melissa. I am unbreakable. You thought you humiliated me in front of strangers, but you revealed nothing about me that I had not chosen to reveal. The only people exposed that day were you." Melissa stared at me, tears spilling freely now. "I can't believe I never knew. I can't believe I treated you like that." Andrew hissed from the corner, but his voice was weaker now. "You should have told us. You should have included us." I turned my gaze on him one final time. "I owed you nothing, not explanation, not disclosure, not wealth. What I gave was love, and you spat on it. What I withheld was truth, and now that you see it, you call it cruelty. But the real cruelty was yours. The day you left me standing with my suitcase while you boarded without me." Caroline muttered under her breath, but she did not meet my eyes. Her smirk had vanished. Melissa whispered, her voice small. "You're not the woman I thought you were." I straightened my shoulders, my tone resolute. "No, I am stronger. I am the woman you chose not to see, the steel beneath the silence, and you will never again mistake me for anything less." The folder remained on the table, its pages undeniable. In that moment, the balance shifted permanently. They had tried to paint me as fragile, dependent, irrelevant. Instead, I had revealed myself as what I had always been, the woman who never needed their approval, the shareholder of empires, the matriarch of unshakable will. The next evening, I was sitting by the window of my penthouse, reviewing correspondence for the foundation, when my phone rang. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Emily, my granddaughter. I answered the FaceTime call, and her young face appeared, eyes bright, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Grandma," she said quickly, "I needed to call you. I wrote my essay for school about the strongest woman I know, and I chose you." For a moment I said nothing. My chest tightened, but not with weakness, with recognition. Recognition that truth had finally broken through the wall her parents had built. "Tell me why, Emily," I said, my voice steady but warm. She smiled shyly, holding up a sheet of paper covered with neat handwriting. "Because you never brag. but you always carry people. Because you help even when no one thanks you. And because when Mom and Dad left you at the airport, I saw your face. You didn't cry. You just stood tall. That's strong, Grandma. Stronger than anyone I know. Behind her, I could see Melissa enter the room. My daughter froze when she realized who Emily was speaking to. Her face stiffened, but she stayed in the doorway listening. I leaned closer to the screen. Emily, strength is not about money or loud voices. It's about standing firm when people try to erase you. It's about knowing who you are when others pretend you are nothing. Emily nodded eagerly. That's what I wrote. My teacher said to pick someone who shows courage. Everyone else picked athletes or celebrities. I picked you. Melissa's face in the doorway tightened, her eyes glistening as if the words pierced something deep. For the first time, she looked stripped of her defenses. Grandma, Emily continued, I don't care what anyone else says. You're the reason I want to do something big one day. Maybe start my own company. Maybe be like you. The innocence in her voice carried more weight than any legal document, more truth than any argument I had with Melissa or Andrew. The next generation saw what the older one had refused to see. Melissa stepped forward finally, her voice trembling. Emily, that's enough. But Emily shook her head firmly. No, Mom, it's true. Grandma is strong. You don't say it, but I know it. I see it. I looked directly at Melissa through the screen, my voice cutting through the silence. You hear her, Melissa? The child you're raising already sees clearer than you ever did. She doesn't measure strength by appearances. She knows the difference between pretending and being. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, one sliding down her cheek as she whispered, Mother, I never knew she thought of you that way. I answered coldly, but not without truth. You never asked. You were too busy building illusions. But children see through illusions. They see truth even when adults bury it. Emily looked between us, sensing the weight in the air. She smiled at me again. I just wanted you to know, Grandma, even if Mom and Dad don't always show it, I love you, and I'm proud of you. I softened only for her. And I love you, Emily, more than you can measure. One day you will understand the importance of standing on your own feet. That will be your true strength. The call ended, but the silence in the room remained heavy. Melissa stood motionless, her tears streaking her face. She turned away, unable to meet my eyes on the screen any longer. For the first time, her confidence collapsed, not because of my words, but because of her daughter's clarity. I sat back, closing my phone, my resolve sharper than ever. The twist had come from the youngest voice in the family. It was Emily who had named me what I truly was: strong, unbroken, unshaken. Melissa could no longer deny it. Her own child had spoken the truth she had buried for years, and in that truth, the foundation of their illusions cracked beyond repair. The next generation had seen me, and they would carry that vision forward long after Melissa's staged perfection faded. I stood in the center of the penthouse living room, the city lights blazing behind me like fire across the skyline. Melissa sat on the sofa, her shoulders slumped, her eyes red from tears she could no longer contain. Andrew paced near the bar, muttering curses under his breath, his bitterness dripping with every word. Caroline leaned against the wall, her smirk faded, her silence loud with defeat. The time for evasions had ended. I placed both hands firmly on the back of a chair, leaning slightly forward, my voice sharp and unwavering. If you want to have a mother, then you will have one relationship with me, and it will be based on respect, not money, not dependency, not entitlement. Respect. That is the only condition I will accept. Melissa raised her head slowly, her lips trembling, but no words came. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and stared at the floor. Andrew's bitter mumble cut through the silence. Respect? That's rich, coming from someone who spent years pulling strings behind our backs. You expect us to bow down now? I turned my gaze on him, cold as steel. I expect nothing from you, Andrew, least of all respect. I am not bargaining. I am stating reality. Without respect, there is no relationship. Not as family, not as anything. He scoffed, pacing tighter circles. You think you've won. You think cutting us off and flaunting your penthouse makes you untouchable. But money doesn't erase cruelty. My eyes narrowed. Cruelty is abandoning your mother at an airport gate. Cruelty is draining every sacrifice she makes and calling it weakness. Cruelty is taking comfort from someone and then mocking them for it. Do not mistake my strength for cruelty, Andrew. The cruelty was yours. Caroline shifted uneasily, finally straightening from the wall. Her voice was lower now, the venom drained. I thought exposing you would make me free. My whole life I lived compared to you. But here you stand, stronger than ever, while I'm left with nothing to say. Maybe I was wrong. Her retreat was clear, her bravado cracked. She grabbed her purse, her face pale, and whispered, "This isn't my fight anymore." Without another glance, she walked toward the door. The sound of it clicking shut was final, a failed conspirator exiting the stage. Melissa watched her leave, silent still, her hands clenched in her lap. I moved closer, my tone lower but sharper. Melissa, for years I gave without question. I hoped you would see me, not as a bank, not as an accessory, but as your mother. And instead, you stripped me of dignity and called it progress. Now you sit here, confronted with the truth, and you say nothing. Why? Where is the defiance now? Her tears fell freely, streaking her face. She whispered, almost inaudible, "Because I have no defense left." I straightened, my chest rising as I spoke with the weight of finality. Then hear me clearly. I do not want your apologies. I do not want your guilt. If you want a place in my life, it will not be bought with entitlement or begged through shame. It will be earned through respect, nothing less. Melissa lifted her head at last, her eyes meeting mine. For the first time there was no armor, no denial, no illusion. Only silence and the faintest trace of understanding. Andrew muttered again, his tone sour, but weaker now. "She's tearing us apart." I turned to him, my voice slicing through the room. "No, Andrew, I am no longer carrying you, that is all. If you fall, it will be by your own weight, not mine." He looked away, his bravado cracked, his mutters trailing into nothing. The room settled into heavy quiet. The skyline beyond glowed brighter as the night deepened, the penthouse standing firm like a fortress around me. For the first time in years, I had spoken not from sacrifice, not from hope, but from absolute authority. Melissa finally whispered, her voice raw. "And if I can't meet your condition?" I answered without hesitation. "Then I will continue my life without you. My foundation, my work, my peace, they will not stop. I will move forward. Whether you walk with me or remain behind is entirely your choice. But the days of taking without respect are finished." Her lips quivered, but no words followed. She sat still, absorbing every syllable. For once, she understood there was nothing left to negotiate. I gathered the folder of documents from the table and slipped them into my bag. My movements were calm, deliberate. "I have given you clarity. Now you must decide. If you want your mother, you know the price. It is not money, it is respect." I turned toward the window, the vast city stretching out before me. Behind me, Melissa sat silent, stripped of excuses, Andrew broken by his own bitterness, Caroline gone in defeat. The confrontation was over. The conditions were set. For the first time, the balance had shifted entirely. They were no longer in control of the narrative, I was. 6 months later, I walked out of the revolving doors of the Tribune Tower, the crisp Chicago air hitting my face as flashes from cameras followed me down the steps. Reporters called out questions about the Susan Miller Foundation, about the new grants being awarded to women launching businesses across the Midwest. My photograph had already appeared on the front page that morning, headlined, "Grandmother Turned Philanthropist, Susan Miller Funds Next Generation of Female Entrepreneurs." I had given my interview in measured tones, explaining why I had chosen to create the foundation. I believe strength is built when women are given tools, not when they're given pity. This is not charity. This is investment. My words spread quickly, resonating far beyond Chicago. I was no longer invisible. I was a figure of substance, seen and respected on my own terms. Meanwhile, across the country, Melissa's world had unraveled piece by piece. The mortgage I once carried had collapsed on her shoulders. Within months, notices piled up, and the house she boasted about on social media was sold under pressure. She and Andrew packed their belongings into rented trucks, the neighbors watching as the perfect family facade crumbled. Emily and Daniel were pulled from their private schools. The glossy brochures, the prestigious uniforms, the prideful parent nights, gone. Melissa walked her children to the local public school now, her chin tight, her smile brittle as she pretended nothing had changed. But the whispers followed her. Friends she once dazzled with vacation photos now avoided her eyes. The illusion had shattered, and in its place was bare survival. Andrew fell silent. He stopped bragging about promotions, stopped spinning promises. He drifted through their small rental, job applications unanswered, his bitterness turning inward. He resented me still, but beneath it lay shame he could not bury. Without my support, he had proven incapable of holding the image he so desperately clung to. And Caroline vanished entirely. Whatever schemes she had whispered into Melissa's ear, whatever venom she had poured into their family dynamic, it all evaporated once reality struck. She stopped visiting, stopped calling, her bravado dissolving when the scaffolding collapsed. For all her talk about tearing me down, she had been nothing more than an opportunist, feeding on Melissa's vanity. Without the illusion of wealth to cling to, she disappeared like smoke. I saw none of this firsthand, but the city has a way of carrying stories. A neighbor wrote me quietly, telling me she had seen Melissa standing outside the grocery store, coupons in hand, her expression hard with pride but soft with exhaustion. Another acquaintance mentioned Andrew had asked about low-level work, his tone stripped of arrogance. And though I did not seek these updates, I did not shy from hearing them. They were the echoes of choices they had made. In contrast, the foundation flourished. We opened a training center in Bronzeville, providing mentorship and seed funding to women who had been ignored by banks and dismissed by investors. I sat in rooms filled with energy, watching young women present business plans with fire in their eyes, and I saw myself reflected there, not the mother discarded at Gate 47, but the builder who had never stopped creating. One afternoon, after a panel discussion, a young woman approached me. She said, "Mrs. Miller, I didn't think people like me could start anything. Now I believe I can." Her words struck me deeply. I realized then that this was my legacy. Not the comfort Melissa squandered, not the vacations Andrew boasted about, but the spark in strangers' eyes when they realized they were capable. And yet, at night, sitting by the vast windows of my penthouse, I thought of Emily. She had called me weeks before, her voice hopeful. "Grandma, I'm still writing about you in school. Even if things are harder at home, I tell everyone I'm proud of you." Those words carried me more than any headline, more than any photograph. Melissa, however, stayed silent. She did not call, did not write. Perhaps pride chained her tongue. Perhaps she was still trying to reconcile the mother she dismissed with the woman on the newspaper's front page. I did not chase her. The conditions had been set, respect or nothing. I poured myself a glass of water and looked over the city lights. 2 worlds had formed in the space of 6 months. Mine, elevated, purposeful, expanding. Theirs, contracted, struggling, forced into the reality they had once despised me for embodying. This was not revenge, it was consequence, and in the quiet of the night I felt no gloating satisfaction, only certainty. Certainty that the truth had prevailed, and that the next generation, Emily, Daniel, and even the women I was now helping, would learn lessons Melissa refused to. 6 months had drawn the line. 2 worlds now stood apart, and only one of them had a future worth walking into. The letter arrived on a quiet Thursday evening. I had just returned from a foundation event when I found the envelope, small and handwritten, resting on my desk. The return name was one that made my chest tighten. Emily. I opened it carefully. Inside was her school essay, written in her neat, deliberate handwriting. At the top it read, "The strongest woman I know." I sat down by the window as the city glowed beneath me, and I began to read. My grandma taught me that strength doesn't come from money, but from knowing your worth. She showed me that silence can be power, that love is real when it isn't bought. People may not see her for who she is right away, but I do. She is strong because she stands, even when others try to push her down. My eyes moved line by line, each word steady, not forced. I want to grow up like her, not to have everything, but to be someone who can't be broken. My grandma is the strongest woman I know. I folded the paper slowly, holding it in both hands. For all the noise of lawsuits, arguments, accusations, and bitterness, the voice of a 12-year-old girl cut sharper than any of them. Emily saw me, not the weak figure her parents painted, not the bank they drained, but the woman I had always been. Melissa's voice echoed in my memory, angry, bitter, wounded. Andrew's accusations, Caroline's venom, all of it had tried to define me as something small, finished, disposable. And yet here was Emily, from another generation, writing truth on plain white paper. I stepped out onto the balcony of my penthouse, the cold air brushing my face. The Chicago skyline burned in every direction, glass towers gleaming against the night. The river shimmered far below like a silver thread, and the city lights stretched endless. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel revenge. What I felt was peace. Emily had given me more than recognition. She had shown me that legacy is not measured in assets or appearances, but in the lessons that endure. I did not need applause from the world. I needed one voice to see clearly, and she had. I whispered softly, though no one stood beside me. "You understand, Emily. That's all that matters." I thought of Melissa, still struggling, still silent. Perhaps she would one day find the courage to face me without excuses. Perhaps not. I had already released her from my ledger. My life no longer hinged on her choices. The truth had become clear. Family cannot survive on money alone. It cannot survive on control or dependency. It lives only where respect is alive. Without respect, blood is meaningless. Without respect, money is nothing but dust. I leaned on the balcony rail, my gaze steady over the horizon. "Respect, Emily," I murmured. "That is what keeps love alive, not gifts, not sacrifices hidden. Respect." For years they had mistaken my silence for weakness, my giving for obligation. But I was never weak. I was steel hidden under warmth. And now the next generation saw it, saw me. The city pulsed beneath me, alive, relentless. I felt it echo in my chest. No boasting, no noise, just the quiet certainty that I had done what was right. Emily's words lingered, sharp and pure. Strength doesn't come from money, but from knowing your worth. That was my truth. That was my legacy. And as I turned back into the light of my home, I knew with certainty I was finally free.